I'm here in Tuscany at the estate of Tenuta Tignanello. It's owned by the family of Antinori. This Florentine family has been making wine here for over 600 years. Here on this estate, they make two world-class wines called Tignanello and Solaia. The vineyards are just behind me there. Iconic wines that age for decades. We're going to begin here in the vineyards with the grapes and start our journey here so that you understand the fundamentals of soil and terroir. It's interesting that the principles of winemaking and viticulture are essentially the same around the world. The concept is, as a winemaker, I look for the best grapes and I try to maintain the quality in those grapes all the way through the winemaking process and into the bottle. So look at this experimental vineyard. Typical soils of the region, Albarese, which is high in calcium. These are fossils that have let off calcium products into the soil. There's other places in the world like that, such as Burgundy, some places in the Central Coast in California. But this is particularly unique in Chianti Classico in Tuscany. Also interesting in this experimental vineyard are these stones. The Antinoris are always looking for better ways to cultivate their vines, even using these stones which are placed around the trunks of the vines themselves. And these stones reflect the sun and also take in heat during the day. So into the night, this heat reflects into the vineyards, and they're hoping that this will help the vines grow and produce better, riper fruit. It's key that there's not too much precipitation in the soil, because all sorts of things can happen, from disease to dilution in the grapes. It's all about a balance in the soil and microclimate of the vineyards. These vines, to me, look in beautiful shape. The canopy has been well maintained. It's shading the grapes, so you're not getting much sunburn. It's all about having the right balance of the foliage and the bunches of grapes to the age of the vine. That brings along perfect maturity as long as God gives us great weather. I love to feel the soil under my feet. It reminds me how important soil, vineyards, climate has to do with wine. It's key, it's everything. For example, here in this vineyard with the Albarese soils, it provides the vines with just enough nutrition, but not too much. This makes the vines grow in a very balanced way. And in a way, they're suffering. But it's not that they're suffering. It's just that they don't want the vines to grow too vigorously or too quickly, because this produces the best quality grapes. And what's amazing to me about these beautiful vines, I love to touch them. Each vine is like a different human being. They have different personalities. They grow up in a different way. Well, what's interesting, these are 25 years old, but they look like they're 6, 7 years old. That's because they've grown with less nutrients than in other areas, and they've maintained this beautiful strength. And we have to always remember that wine is an agricultural product. That's why I was saying it's all here in the vineyard. So today is beautifully clear, but tomorrow we're expecting rain. There could even be hail, which would be catastrophic at this time of the year right before the harvest. So you never know with wine. That's why you have the difference in vintages. One year could be excellent, another year it's almost perfect, but then it starts raining just before the harvest and the whole thing's ruined. So winemakers and viticulturists are doing their very best to maintain the quality always in their vineyards. It'll probably get to about 90, 95 degrees tonight. And then it'll cool off slowly. And by 3 or 4 in the morning, it's down to about 70 or 75. In Tuscany, this is key. And it's what makes Tuscan wines so special. particularly reds. What it does is the grapes ripen to a perfect level, but they maintain natural acidity. So when you taste in a wine this richness of fruit, alcohol, ripe tannins, you also have a freshness, a brightness at the end of your palate when you're tasting the wine. It's awesome, and only Tuscany can do that. As long as the weather holds and we have sunshine, we have very little rain, it's gonna make great wine. But if it rains, it gets cold, the ripeness isn't perfect, then it may have slightly aggressive tannins, or in worst case, it could even be slightly green in flavor. So just start thinking when you're tasting wine, all this influences your taste, the texture in your mouth. Mouthfeel is so important, and it all begins here. People forget that. They think it's just made in the winery. Some magician comes in and makes the wine, and it's all good. The real stuff, the great wine, is all about here. Since we're here at Tenuta Tignanello, I want to talk about the grape varieties that are grown here, such as Sangiovese and Cabernet Sauvignon. It's like a sister and a brother. And Sangiovese makes fresh, fruity, fine tanned, bright acidity wines, while Cabernet, dark, rich, structured, and flavorful. For me, it's amazing to think they're coming from the same soils, the same microclimates, but they're so different. Think about we're here in Chianti Classico, about 20-minute drive from Florence, and we can go to another region just in Tuscany, to Bolgheri, for example. It's so influenced by the sea and the mountains just behind the vineyards. And their Cabernet is a little bit more fleshy. If you tasted it, it's a little bit more round, richer, and then maybe just a little bit of a sea-like character, maybe salty, crazy. But here in Chianti Classico, the wine would be a little bit more sturdy, stronger, tannic, linear. So when you're tasting wine, think of that. You're tasting a wine and it's telling you where it's from. It's talking to you. I like to say it's GPS in the bottle. When I think about grape varieties, I marvel at the fact that some are so good in special places. I remember first going to Germany in 1985 and visiting the key regions, Mosel, Rheingau, Rheinpfalz, and I was just in awe that Riesling was clearly the best variety in Germany in these special places, especially hillside vineyards. And then I went to other hillside vineyards with a river, just like in Germany, but it was in France, in the northern Rhone, in Hermitage, Côte-Rôtie. You know what the great grape is? Syrah. Riesling doesn't work there. Syrah is magic. And a lot of this has to do with history. The vigneron, the grape growers, centuries ago, they started planting grapes, and they realized that certain grapes were best suited to certain areas and produced the best crops with the highest quality. Maybe they just took the grape, tasted it, and it was sweet and ripe, and they said to themselves, yes, that's it. Whatever they did, it works. And what's really cool to think, this took hundreds of years. A lot of places here in Europe, the Romans brought the grapes. And then after hundreds of years, the local growers selected the best vines to get the best grapes and make beautiful wines. Nowadays, of course, there's science involved. There's technology. People study this stuff in university, in vineyards. They select the best grapes, make clonal selections to get the best fruit to make top wine. I've been talking about these grapes, and then I'm realizing at the same time, they're so fragile. We don't know what's going to happen. But then the grapes go to the winery, and it's a whole new process. It's the transformation of the intrinsic quality in the grapes into the bottle. The grapes are taken to the winery. The winery workers are looking at each grape, making sure they're perfect quality. Then the grapes will be destemmed. Then they go into fermentation tanks. And then the fermentation begins. That's the transformation of sugar into alcohol. That's essentially when grapes become wine. And of course, it depends if we're talking about grapes for white wine or red wines. If it was red wine, maybe they leave it on the skins longer to extract more color and flavor. If it's a white wine, they're going to take the skins away from the juice, so they're making a fresh and clean wine. There's so many variables. Winemakers are just figuring out all the time. Temperatures of the fermentations, macerations, how long, whether they filter it or treating them with finings. And then they may even go into barrels. And then there's a whole new world there. Winemakers follow a lot of things. They follow science. They follow their feelings. They follow their hearts, how to make wine, how to make great wine. But also, they can follow history. They can understand, especially in a place like this, with the history, that for decades, this parcel made a wine like that, this parcel of vineyard made a wine like this, and they understand that traditionally those parcels make wines that go really well together. And the opposite, they can understand that another part doesn't blend well together. There are other places that are much more vineyard specific, like Barolo, Barbaresco. Burgundy is probably the best example, where you may have a wine, a few barrels made by a few rows of vineyards. But I've been in areas and the difference from here to there is substantial. Places like Burgundy or the Rhone, they only have a couple of grape types. For example, in Burgundy, it's Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. But there's other places like Bordeaux, where they plant different grape varieties, Cabernet, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot. And those grape types for red wines are essential for Bordeaux because it's an Atlantic climate. There's lots of changes in weather. It's right on the edge. Almost every year, they're not sure how the harvest is going to go. The weather, it could rain. But with these various grape varieties, they have a chance to make excellent wine because they can change the percentage of those grape types in their wine at the end. Maybe this year Merlot was better than Cabernet, so they put a little bit more Merlot. Maybe it was so beautiful that they had more Petit Verdot, and that gave this spicy character to the wine. But it's just crazy when you think about all these different factors that a winemaker has to play with, and they have to figure out the game. And it's amazing to me every time I drink a glass of wine that it's all about that. When I drink that glass of wine, I think about the people, the history, all the hard work that went into making the wine.